Well, I'm back from my 4th of July long weekend trip, and I'm finally getting to talk about something I wanted to talk about before I left last Thursday. That is this trade, this theoretical trade that has been mentioned by the Athletic, Stewart Mandel, the Athletic Stewart Mandel in his mailbag last week. We're going to talk about that in this live lunchtime edition of Couz's Corner. Thank you for joining the show for those of you who are joined. If you aren't live, no big deal. You're watching on the replay. I appreciate you tuning in. Regardless of how you're watching, whether it be live or on the replay, do me a favor. That thumbs up button below, it's called a like. Please hit it. It really helps me out. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you're new here, it's Couz's Corner. I cover West Virginia Mountaineer sports along with stories around the Big 12 and occasionally some conference realignment stuff, which is our focus for today's show. A fan wrote into Stewart Mandel last week for his mailbag and basically asked him, what would you think about a theoretical trade between the Big 12 and the ACC, where the Big 12 sends West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF to the ACC in exchange for Cal, Stanford, and SMU, the three newcomers to the ACC. And Mandel actually loved the idea. He actually thought it was a no-brainer. They should do it, make it work, that he thought it would work for both parties. And I agree with some of his statements. On paper and geographically, it definitely works. And there are some pros to that, not only for the conferences, but for the individual teams, including the team I cover and the team I cheer for, West Virginia. And we're going to talk about that here. We're also going to talk about the pros and cons for the leagues, though, as well, and what it would mean. And again, this is all theoretical. It's the off season, so things like this are being talked about. I want to first and foremost let you know that this is likely not going to happen. We're not going to see a trade between the Big 12 and the ACC. At least I don't think we are. You never say never in conference realignment, right? But the chances of seeing this trade happen are slim to none, in my opinion. So, I want to throw that out there. But it's fun to talk about. And would it work? There are reasons why I think it would and reasons why I think it wouldn't. First, let's look at the pros as to why it would work for the leagues. Let's start with the Big 12. The Big 12 would get Cal and Stanford reunited with their former Pac-12 counterparts in Utah, Colorado, Arizona State. So you'd have basically half of the former Pac-12 in your conference. So you'd get some old rivalries back. There'd be some familiarity there for the Four Corner schools. You would get in to the Pacific time zone if you're Brett Yormark. Right now they're in the Pacific time zone a part of the year with Arizona State, but not the full year. Not sure exactly how it works, but it's my understanding that Arizona doesn't recognize daylight savings time, so they don't change their clocks. So for part of the year they're in the Pacific time zone, and for part of the year they are in the Mountain time zone. So you would get that Pacific time zone all year long. So that would be good for late night TV games. You'd have more options there, those types of things. It gets you into a massive TV market in San Francisco, a market that I'm sure Brett Yormark would probably like to get. He's a big market guy. I'm sure he would love to be in San Francisco. It's new advertising opportunities for the Big 12. So, that would be big. And we all know that markets matter. Yes, Stanford and Cal aren't great in football, especially Cal. Cal's even had some struggles financially, but you get a brand new market, brand new households to sell your TV packages to, brand new, in some cases, wealthy fan bases to advertise to, which would be attractive to advertisers. Those types of things would be important for the Big 12 and could potentially be considered pros for the Big 12 to get those teams in. The pros for the ACC. You get rivalry games in your league. Look at the number of rivalry games you'd be adding to the ACC. If you bring in West Virginia, you're automatically pairing them with Pitt, massive rivalry in the backyard brawl. You're pairing them with Virginia Tech, a good rivalry in the Black Diamond Trophy game. You're pairing them with Louisville, a former Big East rival. You're pairing them with Syracuse, who, those two schools used to play a rivalry game in the Big East as well. I actually had a trophy game. there was a trophy game between Syracuse and West Virginia. It was a good rival back in the day, and you'd be getting that in your conference. You'd also be adding, if you added Cincinnati, you'd be getting that Cincinnati-Louisville rivalry, which is a good rivalry. You'd be getting the Cincinnati-Pitt rivalry, which is a good rivalry. So you'd be getting more rivalry games in your league. You could potentially get a rivalry going between UCF and Miami, UCF and Florida State, if those schools stay in the league, which is something we'll get to in a minute. So you'd have rivalry games in your conference. More of them, so to speak. You'd get another school in Florida. Right now you have Florida State, you have Miami, you'd have UCF in your league. Now, this could also be looked at as a con, because why would you need 3 schools in the state of Florida? Well, technically, I don't know that you would. But could this be a backfill opportunity? With all the talk about Florida State and even Miami potentially leaving the league at some point, would adding UCF now be a good backfiller just in case you do lose those schools and you still have a footprint in the state of Florida? UCF has a very large enrollment, one of the largest enrollments in the country. You'd be getting that. You'd be getting another good market in Orlando. You'd be getting a very young fan base, which would bring young fans into your conference. A lot of positives there with UCF. With Cincinnati, you're getting into the Midwest, or closer to the Midwest, rather, in the state of Ohio. That opens up some new markets for you, some new recruiting territory potentially for some ACC schools, those types of things. So all those could be looked at as pros if you're the ACC for adding those 3 schools, right? Now let's look at some cons. And then we'll get to more specifically West Virginia, what it would mean for them, and also my opinion on this. The cons. First, for the Big 12. Yes, you would be picking up Pacific time zone teams in Stanford and Cal, teams that are in the Pacific time zone year-round. But the problem with that is you'd be losing your 3 Eastern time zone schools in this scenario, in West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF. In my opinion, the Eastern time zone is a more valuable time zone to be in than the Pacific. There are a lot more football fans per capita, in my opinion. And I'm sure there's probably data out there to back this up. I feel like there are more college football fans in the Eastern time zone. So yes, while you'd be picking up a time zone, you're losing the Eastern, which is likely more valuable. The Eastern time zone has there's more population in the Eastern time zone, especially more football fans in the Eastern time zone. So I think losing the Eastern time zone would actually be more detrimental to you than picking up the Western time zone would be positive to you. So that would be a negative. You'd be losing the state of Florida if you're the Big 12. One of the, obviously a hot recruiting bed for all of your schools, a large market for all of your schools, a large state with a large population. You'd be losing UCF, a very young and passionate fan base, a very large fan base, large enrollment, large, alumni bases that not only now, but in the future that you would be losing in your league. Obviously losing Cincinnati, which is that kind of that Midwestern or close to Midwest presence that you have in your conference to kind of get you between. It's kind of between Kansas and West Virginia. You got that Cincinnati market. And then adding SMU into the Big 12, why would you need another Texas school? You already have 4 schools in your conference. Baylor, Texas Tech, Houston, TCU. And heck, TCU's even in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, TV area. Dallas-Fort Worth TV market. Why would you need another school in that television? Yes, I know Dallas and Fort Worth are 2 different cities. I got jumped by some fans on that. I'm not saying they're the same city. It's the same DMA, the same television market. So why would you need another school in that television market? Neither of those schools are going to carry the state of Texas from a fan perspective. Anyway, the Longhorns are doing that. So would there really be any value in adding another school from the state of Texas to the Big 12 outside of just the logical, which is, logistics and travel? Now let's look at the cons for the ACC. You would be losing your prestigious, I guess you could say 3 prestigious academic schools in Stanford, Cal, and SMU, especially Stanford and Cal. And, the ACC, takes that very seriously. Not saying all conferences don't, but the ACC, heck, it's one of the main reasons they left, that West Virginia has never been able to get into the ACC because of their academic rankings and those types of things, because of the mission of their school and is different than what the ACC schools have, who put a huge emphasis on research. They put a huge emphasis on academic ranking, those types of things. You'd be losing arguably the best non-Ivy League school in the country in Stanford, and you'd be losing Cal as well, which is another good school, and even SMU is a good academic school. You'd be losing the state of Texas for the ACC. You wanted to get SMU so you could get a presence in the state of Texas. You wouldn't want to give that up, I wouldn't think. So that would be and obviously that Midwest presence that you have in SMU. So you'd be losing a TV market. You'd be losing a team in the Central Time Zone. You'd be losing the state of Texas if SMU were to leave your league. And then with UCF, I kind of mentioned this earlier, do you really need another school in the state of Florida if you're the ACC? Unless you're playing the backfill because you know Florida State and Miami are heading out, why would you want to add UCF, right? And one thing I did fail to mention earlier, though, back to the academic piece for the ACC losing them, that's one pro I forgot to mention was, the Big 12 could really, really improve their academic standing by adding schools like Stanford and Cal to their conference, and even SMU for that matter. If you trade West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF, probably three of the lower-rated Power 4 schools when it comes to academics. Doesn't mean they're bad schools. I'm not throwing shade at them by any means. Just looking at U.S. News rankings and those types of things and what these conferences and these schools look for, you'd be losing three of your lower-rated schools, arguably for three really high-rated schools. And again, I'm speaking off the cuff here a little bit. I know West Virginia is low-rated as far as other Power 4 schools. I'm pretty sure Cincinnati and UCF are, definitely not in that top tier. They're rated higher than West Virginia, I think, but not quite sure they'd be up with the other ACC schools. So if you're the Big 12, you'd be improving your academic standing, your academic ratings, and those types of things by getting those three schools into your conference in Cal, Stanford, and SMU, especially Cal and Stanford. So that would be another pro for the Big 12 that I forgot to mention earlier. When you look at the individual schools, and let's focus right now on the Big 12 and West Virginia specifically. Would this be a good thing for West Virginia? I think on the surface, you'd say yes, right? They get back into a conference that matches their geographic footprint. They get to go play their old rivals again in Pitt, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Louisville, even Boston College. They get to put those schools on the schedule every year again, right? Miami, that would be a plus. Fans can travel to games again. I think a lot of fans would be excited about that. So that's a huge positive. But here's the downside. If the ACC, which in the second half of the show, we're going to talk a little ACC talk. If the ACC is in danger of collapsing and falling apart anyway, why in the world would you leave a conference in the Big 12 that at least appears to be stable? Yes, they're not making SEC and Big 10 money, but they're at least stable. And right now, from a stability perspective, you could argue that it's the third strongest conference of all the Power 4 because of the stability. So why would you leave a conference that appears to be stable? Yes, there's some disagreements in the league, just like every league has. No, not everybody's going to sing Kumbaya and hold hands all the time. But it appears that the Big 12 is stable. And heck, even if you want to look at it glass half empty, maybe they're stable because none of the other leagues want their teams. Maybe that's possible. But they're still stable. There's still stability in that conference. Why would you leave that if you're West Virginia to go to a league in the ACC that might be losing their top brands? And that might fall apart completely. So for that reason, unless you had some sort of guarantee, and I'm not even sure you can do that in today's time, in this era, unless you had some kind of guarantee that Florida State, Clemson, Miami, UNC, UVA, and some of these other schools were staying in the ACC long term, it would make zero sense for the West Virginia to make this move because right now you have stability. You're an A4, aka Power 4 school. You could go to the ACC, watch it collapse underneath you. The ACC could potentially lose its P4 status, and then you're stuck. So the grass is not always greener. And again, this is all a hypothetical or theoretical situation here that's probably has a 1 in a million chance of happening anyway. This talked about trade between the Big 12 and the ACC. But even if it was possible, even if it was feasible, I don't think West Virginia would do it at this time simply because of the lack of stability in the ACC. Now, if the ACC was stable, I think they would probably do it, honestly, because of the things I mentioned. Geographic, they'd cut costs in travel. They'd be able to play their old rivals again. I think, honestly, all things being equal, if you were making the same TV revenue and everything was being equal, I think West Virginia would actually do better financially in the ACC. I think they would get more fans to games. I think they, I think it would be a better move long term from a fan base perspective in that regard. But again, the Big 12 is more stable than the ACC right now, at least it appears. So therefore, West Virginia likely would not want to make such a move at this time. Now, before we get into the second topic I want to talk about today, which is the ACC potentially collapsing, or the details we got around the Clemson Florida State settlement with the ACC. I want to check in with the comment section. And, oh, by the way, another thing, obviously I mentioned the travel piece and the fan engagement piece. Those would be positives of West Virginia going to the ACC in a theoretical trade. We've got Jeffrey Landis in the house. We've got Raven. What's up, Raven? We've got D5 Terps. We've got Browns and Beers, who's a paid VIP member here on the channel. He says, you know my thoughts on this, Couz. Despite the geographical distance between WVU and the rest of the Big 12, we fit in better culturally with the schools in the Big 12. And I agree with that. That's something else I didn't mention, but I've mentioned it on the show ad nauseum. West Virginia is a great fit in the Big 12 culturally. I think West Virginia would be a little bit of an outlier. I think Louisville's kind of an outlier right now in the ACC from a culture standpoint. Maybe I'm wrong. If you're a Louisville fan watching this, you can correct me. But I think West Virginia would be similar to Louisville in an outlier to a degree based on, the culture in the state, based on the university's mission of letting in more students and graduating maybe less students because of those less stringent acceptance rates. The culture in the state's different than some of the other states. So there's a lot of things that would make West Virginia not a fit in the ACC, but makes them a better fit in the Big 12. So cultural is another thing too that I failed to mention. That Browns and Beers, thank you for bringing that up. D5 Terp says advantage Stanford, Cal, SMU in markets. WVU with Pitt, Virginia Tech, Miami, Syracuse would be awesome, assuming the ACC stayed intact. Exactly, D5 Terpson. Right now, who knows if they will. Daniel Gigax in the house, another VIP member. Thank you, Daniel. He says, with the issues the ACC has, I would pass on a trade. Do we really know who will be in the ACC in 5 years? Bingo. We don't. McVeigh edits says we play Pitt a lot more, which would be good for ticket sales. Got Jansen Roberts in the house. Says, in theory, it's a good love. Reality is completely different. Stanford and Cal wouldn't even consider it and would tie the whole thing up for decades in litigation. Yeah, and that actually brings me, that's a great point, Jansen. I don't think there's any chance in Hades that Stanford and Cal would ever go for this. Stanford and Cal want to be in a conference with schools that have the same vision they do from an academic perspective. You can say they look down their nose at the Big 12, and that's probably true to a degree. Heck, I think SMU even does to a degree. So I think I think there's a snowball's chance in hell that Cal and Stanford would ever want to join the Big 12. Now, there's a rumor out there that they did talk to the Big 12 when the Pac-12 was collapsing, and they probably did. But that was one situation where they likely had no choice. We're assuming here that they have a choice whether to approve the trade or not. And if they have a choice, I think they'd rather stay in the ACC with institutions who in their mind are more like-minded from an academic perspective, an academic alignment, research, all those things. I think Stanford and Cal prefer the ACC over now. If the travel gets to be such a hard pill to swallow that maybe they change their mind, I don't know. And by getting rid of WVU and maybe even UC Cincinnati, UCF. Again, I'm not exactly sure where they stand on the academic rankings, but maybe by getting them out of the league and bringing those three in, the academic standards of the Big 12 automatically shoot up. And then maybe Stanford and Cal would be cool with that. I don't know, because they probably look at Utah, Arizona State more like their peer institutions from academics perspective. TCU has pretty high academic ratings. Kansas is an AAU institution. So there are some like-minded institutions in the Big 12, or at least somewhat close to what Stanford and Cal would be looking for, but pretty much the entire ACC, maybe with the exception of Louisville, would fall in that category. Browns and Beers says, a big part of why WVU was always thought of as an unclassy fan base throughout the 2000s was that teams' fans were coming into Morgantown looking down on the state and school. Big 12 fan bases have not. And that's a great point. Big 12 fans love West Virginia. I saw a poll on X the other day. Somebody put out, I think it was Heartland College Sports, said, asking Big 12 fans, would you like your trade? And over 70% of the fans voted no. They would rather keep West Virginia, UCF, and Cincinnati, and many of them spoke highly of West Virginia, specifically in the comment section of that poll. The Big 12 has embraced West Virginia. They've wrapped their arms around not only from a schools and an administrative standpoint, but from a fan base standpoint. I've grown to love the fan bases in this conference. If the Big 12, West Virginia ever left the Big 12, I'd miss it. I would miss it. I would miss the interaction with the fans. So yes, there would there's definitely a cultural piece to this that I think is probably lost upon people at times. Sarah McCoy says, how would adding West Virginia help the ACC? You would be there now if they really wanted West Virginia. It's all about money, and recruiting rivalries mean little. You're wrong about that. ESPN's executives, one of ESPN's executives said in an interview just a couple of years ago, they want as many rivalry games as possible on TV. So that statement that rivalries mean little is not true. Now, does it mean everything? No, it does not. It is about money. West Virginia, contrary to what you believe, Sarah McCoy, since you seem to be a West Virginia hater, West Virginia would be a good addition to the ACC. They would, not only would they bring those rivalry games, they bring a very passionate fan base who would likely be in the top half of the ACC from day one, maybe even in the top third of the ACC from day one as far as fan base passion, fan base size. We would automatically be one of the winningest programs in your conference historically. So, you can throw shade at West Virginia all you want to. Yes, they have lower academic rankings. No, they're not a blue blood, but to get who is in the ACC outside of Florida State, maybe Miami, maybe Clemson. Who else is a blue blood in your conference? Tell me, because I don't see any. All right. But I do appreciate the comment. We can respectfully disagree. What's up, CFB Plus? Good morning or afternoon for those of us on the East Coast. 2/3 of America lives in the Eastern time zone. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's why I think if you're the Big 12, you do not want to lose those schools in that Eastern time zone, even if you can gain the Pacific time zone. I just don't think it makes any sense. What percentage chance? 1 in a million? Jay Chapman, probably. Again, it's all hypothetical, theoretical, whatever the word is. But because Stewart Mandel actually said he would be all for it and thought it would be a good idea, it's kind of gained some steam. But again, it's all theory. It's all speculation. It's all just fun banter at this point. Who people watch on TV at present, college football fans watch the SEC and the Big Ten. Now, that's Sarah McCoy. That's actually true. That is actually true. I will agree with that. But there are schools in the other conferences that do get TV ratings and would likely get even better ratings if they were put on network TV more often. All right. Browns and Beers says there's high school stadiums in Texas that have a larger stadium capacity and fill their stadiums more regularly than SMU. You're exactly right. Daniel Gigax says Berkeley was ranked the #1 public university in America. I don't think the ACC wants to lose that. Agree, Daniel. The ACC really, really, really cares. They may care more about that than they do winning on the field. Let's be honest. At least the presidents might. So they don't want to lose being tied to Cal, being tied to Stanford. They don't, and do they want to lose their presence in Texas? I don't think so. If the ACC was stable and offered WVU to join, you take it. I think they would, D5 Terps, if they were stable, just because I think that's really deep down where West Virginia administration, and I don't know this, I'm not having anybody tell me this. This is just me reading the tea leaves and kind of trying to use common sense. I think West Virginia's administration will. That's probably where they've always wanted to be. Obviously, you want to be in the P2 if you can get into P2. But outside of that, I think West Virginia would like to be in the ACC. But At least they did in the past. And I think that might have changed now because of the stability issue. And, administrations aren't going to hold grudges. They're going to do what's best for their institution. And if they thought going to the ACC was better for their institution and they had just a chance, they would do it. All right, let's go ahead and let me see what else we got in here. Drum Wolf 62's in the house. See who else? I mentioned Sarah, CFB Plus. I mentioned Cheers Beer. Did I mention Cheers Beers Mountaineers? Says, I want to see the ACC completely fail. They are our recruiting competition and just screw them. I'd rather see Pitt and VT fail as programs. These are also the same schools that blocked us in 2011. I'm not sure if Pitt and VT blocked West Virginia or not. The rumor has it that it was Maryland and Tobacco Road schools that blocked West Virginia primarily. But but again, that's all speculation on my part. I don't know that for 100% fact. D5 Terps disagrees with some of the commenters, I think. He thinks WVU with Miami, Pitt, VT, Pitt, Syracuse, Louisville, NC State would be fantastic. All right. Real quick, before we get into the second half of the show where I'll talk about what's going on in the ACC, I'm going to share a little bit with you about what I'm hearing from a source I have who is somewhat close to the situation. Before we do that, I'm going to remind you to go check out the fine folks over at Appalachia Digital. Appalachia Digital, they're a digital company, obviously, who does website design, things like that. They will help you. If you have a website, they'll help you get found more on Google. They're the fine folks who designed my new website, or our new website, over at wvsportschat.com. They did a great job designing that website. It looks very professional, very well done. They can do the same for you. Go to appalachiadigital.com/Couz if you're looking for a brand new website. Or if you want to get your site found easier on Google, they also specialize in Google SEO services. So check them out. Again, appalachiadigital.com, use /Couz. Let them know I sent you, and let them hook you up with a great website today or great SEO optimization services. Now, let's go ahead and dive in to the second thing I wanted to talk about, and that's the ACC. Now, we had a report come out. I actually found out about this first by watching Greg Pflugar's College Football Peek Around the Corner show. I guess it would have been Thursday or Wednesday of last week. I don't remember the date exactly. But he was talking about the report that came out over at ESPN, where they were able to get their hands on the settlement agreement through a FOIA request between the ACC and Clemson. This was primarily talking about Clemson, but Florida State's language would be similar. Basically, it broke down the conference payouts or the conference buyouts if teams were to leave the league. Kind of something we've already known. It starts out at like $175 million and goes down a percentage. I think it goes down about $18 million or so a year. By the time 2030 rolls around, it's down to like $75 million. But what we also found out is that Clemson and Florida State have veto power on any change of language or anything regarding the new conference bylaws or grant of rights or any of that stuff. They have final say. They have veto power. We also found out that no school in the ACC can sue the league. We also found out that, and now that what I found out, I went back to review this article for myself. This part has been redacted from the article. But Greg mentioned it on his show, and I think this is really the important part that I want to hone in on here. Again, it's been redacted from the article, but Greg mentioned it on his show before the redaction happened, because the article was originally printed, I think, on June 29th or so. It got updated on July 3rd, and the new update did not have this language in it. But it said that if at least 6 schools, and I'm paraphrasing, but if at least 6 schools would decide to leave the conference to form a new league or a new super league outside the current conference structure, basically, the buyout would only be $75 million for each school, regardless of the year. That is huge, in my opinion, because we've heard rumblings that a new conference could form. Again, I think that's a long shot. We've heard rumblings that a new conference could form with maybe what we heard about the Magnificent Seven that met a couple years ago to talk about how to get out of the ACC grant of rights. If those schools all voted to form a new league, they would only have to pay $75 million each to get out. Now, there are rumblings that new league has been discussed. There have been all kinds of rumblings about who would be involved in that new league. Would Notre Dame be part of it? Would Florida State and Clemson be part of it? Would they try to poach a couple teams from the Big 12, like West Virginia, for example, to join them to make it more of an East Coast league? There's a lot of things out there that are all rumor, all speculation, right? And everything I'm going to talk about today from here going forward in this live show, in this episode, is all speculation, okay? I want to make that clear. Nothing is imminent. None of this is proven 100% fact. This is all stuff I'm hearing from my sources, but it all kind of ties into this article that was put out on the last week that Greg Pflugar talked about. I'll leave a link to both the article and I'll leave a link to Greg's show in the description of this video, this live stream. But the reason I think it ties in is because I think this could impact the Big 12 big time. Because if some of this happens, if some of these teams leave, even if it's not 6 teams, even if it's 4 teams, the Big 12 has a chance, and we've all talked about this, the Big 12 has a chance to pick off some teams from the ACC potentially, teams that may not make it into the Power 2. Teams like Louisville, for example. I'm hearing over and over again that Louisville is not happy with how things have played out in the ACC. They're not happy with the scheduling agreement between Notre Dame and Florida State and Miami and Clemson. They're not happy with, the veto power. I'm sure they're not happy with the veto power that Clemson and Florida State have been granted. They're not happy with the unequal revenue sharing. Now, I hear this, and then I think in my head, and it's not that I don't believe my source, but in my head I'm thinking, why would they agree to this on paper? Maybe they felt forced to agree with it. Maybe they didn't have a choice but to agree with it, right? And maybe it didn't take and it probably didn't take an anonymous vote, or a unanimous vote to make these things happen, right? But the ACC has agreed to all these things, and apparently all the schools have. But maybe they did it because they felt like they didn't have a choice or felt pressure to do so. I don't know. But nonetheless, there are reportedly, or at least rumored to be, teams in the ACC that are not happy. Heck, we've heard Greg talk about it on his show. They're behind the scenes, and it's not all hunky-dory in the ACC, despite this settlement. And Louisville, from everything I'm hearing, might be the ringleader of those that are pissed. They are not happy with how things are being handled. They feel like they're being mistreated. They're being disrespected. Maybe they feel like they're on an island a little bit. But whatever the case may be, I think there's a really strong chance that at some point, Louisville can land in the Big 12 because it doesn't seem like they have a home anywhere else. But I think they'd be a great addition to the Big 12. I mentioned adding Louisville. I mentioned if West Virginia and Cincinnati went over to the ACC, they'd get the rivalry back with Louisville. Same goes if Louisville comes to the Big 12. Louisville gets the rivalry back with West Virginia. Look, that rivalry is nowhere near the level of West Virginia and Pitt or West Virginia, Virginia Tech. Maybe not even West Virginia and Syracuse, but it was a pretty decent rival. And I think had they stayed in the same conference, it would have grown over time. So that could come back. You get into a new state in the state of Kentucky. You get, it's another team that's kind of in that Midwestern part of the country. You get the Cincinnati-Louisville rival on your schedule. I think it'd be a good move for the Big 12. And Louisville has a very passionate fan base. They have some large donors that really help out their program. They have a very, very strong basketball program, very strong history in basketball. So there are a lot of reasons that Louisville would be attractive to the Big 12, and why the Big 12 might be attractive to Louisville if they see that the ACC is not going to make it. Or even if they see a couple teams jump ship in the Big 12 or from the ACC to one of the P2, maybe they see their opportunity to jump ship as well. We'll see. But nonetheless, do not be surprised if at some point within the next 4 to 5 years, Louisville's a member of the Big 12. I'm not saying it's imminent, not even predicting it to happen, but I think there's at least a 50-50 shot that it happens at some point down the road. Now, what else am I hearing from Oh, let me go back. I'm jumping around a little bit here. I'm sorry. I do have notes, but my brain's also all over the place. Back to that Magnificent Seven and ACC breaking up deal, potentially breaking up deal. So a lot of scenarios could come into play there. Would those schools, would 6 to 7 schools, like I said, poach teams from the Big 12, would they just form their own league out of 8 to 10 ACC schools? And kind of that would be a way of kind of shedding the dead weight, so to speak, in their mind of maybe the lower tier ACC schools, the teams like a Boston College or a Wake Forest. Those are all scenarios that could potentially play out. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. But I think what these ACC schools are doing are leaving every option on the table. I also think private equity and private capital are a part of the discussion, because if they see that they can't get in, if schools like Clemson, Florida State, maybe North Carolina, if they see they can't get in the P2, maybe they look at this other conference as a better option than the current ACC as it's constructed. And maybe they bring in private equity firms to foot the bill, to pay for it. That's something that I would not rule out. I think it's probably their last option, but I wouldn't rule it out completely, because I think right now what they're doing is exploring every possible scenario. They have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and probably even a plan D for how things could shake out going forward. I wanted to bring that up. But let's go ahead and let you know what else I'm hearing from my source about what's going on with the ACC. Some of this Greg has talked about in his show. Some of it maybe he hasn't. Greg has talked about the SEC having serious discussions with North Carolina and Virginia. My source is echoing that same sentiment. Okay. It's very, very serious. Something else my source has reiterated to me multiple times and continues to bring it up is the fact the SEC wants in the state of North Carolina and Virginia so badly, they might be willing to take NC State and Virginia Tech along with them just to appease the political pressures, so to speak, that would come along with taking those two schools. Because we all know the political pressures in North Carolina with them being attached to NC State, problems that could cause with their board of governors. We've all heard about the Virginia Attorney General coming out and saying if either school would leave the conference, he would make sure the other one was taken care of, meaning between UVA and Virginia Tech. And we saw what political pressure is what got Virginia Tech into the ACC in the first place. They were not originally going to be part of the ACC when the ACC was poaching the Big East back in the mid-2000s. They took Syracuse. They took Boston College. They took Miami. They had no intentions of taking Virginia Tech. But the pressure applied by the Attorney General and other politicians in the state of Virginia created it to where the ACC felt like they needed to take Virginia Tech. They especially put pressure on UVA to help push it over the finish line, and that's what happened. It could happen again this time. Could the SEC actually, there are a couple different ways I could see this playing out. A, they might just take North Carolina, Virginia, and they may work out some kind of deal to where Virginia Tech and North Carolina State get X amount of dollars a year to help fill the payment gap of what those schools will be making in the P2 to help them stay competitive. Maybe they just pay them off, kind of like Cal's doing with Cal, kind of like what UCLA did with Cal. Maybe they just have to pay them, so to speak. The other thing I've seen happen, and if that happens, then maybe you see Florida State and Clemson go to the SEC with UNC and UVA, which is exactly what Greg Pflugar has predicted he thinks will happen. So maybe that's the scenario that plays out, that my source seems to think either of those scenarios are possible. But or when I say either scenario, the other scenario, they are willing to take, they want in the state of Virginia, North Carolina so bad that they are actually willing to take NC State and Virginia Tech for their 4 teams. If that happens, that would really shake things up, because then what happens with Clemson and Florida State? Are they completely left out? Or does the Big Ten go and take Miami and Florida State as a package deal? Because we've heard rumors that Florida State is not necessarily first on the Big Ten's list of targets, but might be an option. But here's the thing. With this whole deal with Wisconsin and Miami being sued, Miami being sued by Wisconsin for poaching a player, and the Big Ten taking Wisconsin's side, that has really strained any potential relationship, potentially could have strained any relationship between Miami and the Big Ten if there were to be one down the road. It could give the Big Ten caution in adding a school like Miami. So that might hurt. That might not only hurt Miami, it might also hurt Florida State, because who's Florida State's partner if they want to get in the Big Ten? Because we've heard reports they're not number one on the Big Ten's list. You know who is reportedly, allegedly number one on the Big Ten's expansion list? Excuse me. We all know Notre Dame's number one on that expansion list. My source, he's fed me some information about Notre Dame as well. NBC, according to my source, allegedly is putting pressure on Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. They want them as part of the Big Ten. Can you imagine the games NBC would get if Notre Dame's in the Big Ten? Because remember, NBC's part of the TV deal with Fox and CBS to air Big Ten games. And if they could continue their relationship with Notre Dame as well, man, they could get some great games on NBC. But apparently NBC is allegedly, again, this is allegedly, rumored to be pushing Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. Notre Dame is also talking with North Carolina and Virginia, allegedly. Now, they are, according to my source, they are more interested in North Carolina than they are Virginia. And Notre Dame, UNC, and again, we've heard Greg say basically the same thing. UNC, or Notre Dame and UNC would be their top two picks. So UNC right now is sitting in a pretty good spot. They could actually have a bidding war potentially between the Big Ten and SEC between what conference they get to join. Which conference will give them the biggest payout? Which conference will give them a full share? Which conference will let them bring along whatever partner they want, which would probably be UVA because of their long-term relationship. UNC right now might be in the best position outside of Notre Dame, obviously. They might be in the best position of any of the ACC schools anyway. The ACC football members, even better than Florida State and Clemson, because UNC is highly coveted by both Power 2 leagues because of all the stuff Greg's laid out. The college enrollment apocalypse that's coming. North Carolina continues to gain population. They continue to gain student population at UNC. The age of the residents of North Carolina is going up. All those things matters. All right. I mean, the college age, there's an increase in college age residents of North Carolina. All of that matters to them. It also gets you in a new state, a new market. You get a flagship institution that, oh, by the way, also happens to be pretty highly rated from an academic perspective and is an AAU member. And if UVA comes along with them, you get two prestigious public schools that are AAU members, and both are flagships. That's why both of those schools are attractive. Throw the football numbers out the window here. These are college presidents we're talking about. And from a network perspective, they apparently want UNC as well for the same reasons. It's all about markets in this conversation, all about new states, new markets, new cities, new games you can put on your network, new games you can put on your networks. Fox is obviously would be perfectly fine with Notre Dame joining the Big Ten for obvious reasons, according to my source. And they would allow, according to my source, they would allegedly allow Notre Dame to bring in whoever they wanted. They want Notre Dame that bad. Fox and the Big Ten would allow Notre Dame to pick their partner to join the conference, potentially. Here's the order I was given of Notre Dame's potential partners. Obviously, UNC would be number one. Stanford would be pick 2 if they got to pick. Duke would be choice 3, and Georgia Tech would be choice 4. Who was missing from that list? Miami. So it sounds like the presidents of the Big Ten and Fox are in alignment here in what they would want as far as realignment and adding Notre Dame to the conference. But to be honest with you, that's probably not new news to you. Some of that is just common sense. Who would not want Notre Dame to join their league, right? It's common sense, especially if you're already tied to one of the networks you have a partnership with. I talked about Miami. Maybe they don't They might struggle to get the votes to join the Big Ten now because of the whole situation with Wisconsin. Wisconsin, according to Greg Flugart, carries quite a bit of weight in the Big Ten. They're what they say matters in that league. And my source also indicated, I mentioned earlier, this possible future Eastern Conference that could be formed. Still possible, still a long shot. Notre Dame, according to my source, Notre Dame would likely have to be a part of it before it would ever work. And I just don't see that happening. The only way I see Notre Dame doing something like that is if they don't want to be in the Big Ten for whatever reason. And if they're not able to keep their independence because of maybe their access to the college football playoff gets limited, or they don't have a home for their Olympic sports. They might be forced to join a league, and a league says, look, you're not joining in Olympic sports. If you want to join us, you got to be a football member too. I could see the Big Ten doing that. Or maybe this new conference says, hey, this new conference forms, Notre Dame, you don't have to be a member in football. You can keep your independence in football and join in other sports. Now, I think that would personally be a mistake. I think if you let Notre Dame join, you force them to join in football as well. If not, I feel like you could potentially be hurting your conference long-term by allowing Notre Dame to carry such a big stick over the rest of the schools in the conference. But again, I think this new league is a long shot, but still a possibility. But here's the takeaways. SEC and Big Ten both want North Carolina, allegedly. NBC, Fox, and the Big Ten all would love Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. And the NBC is reportedly putting more pressure on Notre Dame to join the Big Ten, especially if the ACC deal falls apart. UVA, possible expansion candidate along with UNC, but don't rule out Virginia Tech and NC State being part of the foursome that joins the SEC along with UNC and UVA, which would leave Clemson and Florida State in a precarious position. Would there actually be a scenario there where they actually have to feel like they need to join the Big 12? I don't see that happening, because I think as long as Florida State and Clemson are still out there, still members of the ACC, I think the ACC could build around them and potentially even attract members from the Big 12 to come over to the ACC. Because if you've still got Clemson and Florida State in your league, it makes that league more attractive. But here's the problem, though. Would West Virginia or any school in the Big 12, for that matter, want to come over and join a conference that has that unequal revenue sharing agreement? I'm not sure they would. But again, there are so many scenarios here that could play out in conference realignment. None of us know what's going to actually happen. None of us know what these conversations and what's going on in these rooms. Man, would it be awesome to be a fly on the wall. But none of us really know what's going to happen. None of us can predict what's going to happen. It's all speculation. Matter of fact, I should have put on my sunglasses and did my Golden Blue Dude impression and took you into the speculation zone, because that's basically what the second half of this episode was speculation. Based on what I'm hearing from my source, who is somewhat close to the situation. And I'll continue to, provide info as I see fit on this scenario. Again, my source is not saying this is imminent. He's not saying this is going to happen. He's not making predictions. He's just telling us the conversations behind the scenes and what might be happening. And some of this is not a secret. Some of it Greg Flugart's talked about, but hopefully I was able to shed a little bit more light on it from my perspective and what I'm hearing on my end as well. And I also think Louisville is a big piece of this and is not getting talked about enough. And I also think that piece about North Carolina State and Virginia is not being talked about enough. Those are things that people are glossing over and not paying enough attention to in this whole ACC situation, in my opinion. But again, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. I personally think if all this happens, any of this happens, I think it's going to happen before the year 2030, because these TV networks, before they negotiate these deals with these conferences, they need to know what schools are in these conferences. So I don't think they're going to wait till 2030 or 2031 to make any announcements if schools decide to leave a conference, regardless of what conference that is. These are things that need to happen sooner rather than later, so they know what TV deal they're negotiating or who they're negotiating with, right? So I don't think it'll be 5 years. I don't think we'll have to wait 5 years for some of this to break loose, if it's going to happen. But again, it's a big if, and all this is alleged, and it's all rumors. I want to make sure I throw that out there. So let's get back to a few comments here. I think I may have missed a super chat earlier, and I apologize. I got ahead of myself here. Appalachia Africa Twin, I apologize for not reading this earlier. He says, just a post-holiday shot for you, Brother Couz. Thanks for the show today. Thank you for the super chat, and I apologize for not reading it earlier. I got on my soapbox and just my apologies. I had to cough and get me a drink. But anyway, thank you so much for that super chat. We've got all kinds of comments now we've got some new people who have joined the chat. Alan Olive, Bob Swanger, Outlaw College Football says the AAU is a farce. Football and men's basketball numbers can never be thrown out. They're not thrown out. I think AAU, I wouldn't call it a farce. What I'd call it is it's a way for the elitists to look down on everybody else and kind of handpick who they want to do certain things with. If you want to call that a farce, then yes, it's a farce. I do think it's a bunch of BS. And they cannot be thrown out for sure. They are a part of it. But unfortunately, these college presidents look at so many other things outside of that have nothing to do with football or basketball. And at the end of the day, they're the ones making the decisions. The Big 12 wants NC State and Louisville. Says, call me David. I agree. I remember hearing Jason Shear say that in a podcast he did one day, I believe. College Football Plus says, Greg has said the window of opportunity for at least for announcements is the next 18 months. Why are you calling someone a dummies? What it's there, Brad? Try giving an opinion. Fact is, you have none. All right, got some heated discussion in the chat here. I see. I like it. Don't get too overly personal, but I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be a softy and not let anybody talk trash. But just keep it clean and civil is all I ask. Apologize, my allergies are acting up on me today. Brad Booth says he thinks the trade makes sense. Bob Swanger in the house, who's a paid VIP member, he says, good talking to you, Alan Olive. We've got a Born Identity in the house. Son of Skeeter, 1999-17. We got Adam, Daniel Gigak still here. Scrooge McDuck in the house. Be careful with speculations. We were quoted more than once. Yeah, Daniel, I know, man. That's why I try to say it multiple times. But, people are going to run with what they want to run with. I was actually even hesitant to do this show, to be honest, because of that. Anyway, Bob Swanger says, what Alan Olive have to say here? What's up, Tosh Miller? Tosh Miller's also a paid VIP member, and he says, hit that like button, the thumbs up button. It means a lot. It's right below. It's free. It's easy. It takes about a second. If you're in the chat, hit the X, exit out of the chat, hit the thumbs up, and click the chat and bring it right back up. You're right back in. And you don't lose a bit of the show. Alan Olive says, Pitt's future looks bleak in college football landscape. USF has a better future. I don't know about that. More Penn State fans in Western Pennsylvania than Pitt fans. Alan, look, I hate Pitt as much as the next guy, but I will not go as far as to say they have a better future or that USF has a brighter future than Pitt. Pitt is still a respected school, a respected program, athletic program. So I wouldn't go that far. But you have a right to that opinion. I think you're basing that strictly on the fact that USF is spending money. They are building new stadiums and those types of things, and they are in the state of Florida, but it still doesn't make them more relevant than Pitt, in my opinion. A Born Identity says ND is the only school in the country that doesn't make moves based on money. Must be nice. It is, because they don't need to, because they already have plenty of money, for one. But they're making darn near Big Ten and SEC money on their own. So they're not quite there, but they're making probably, if you add in college football playoff money plus their TV contract and everything else, plus what they get from the ACC, I'd say they're making right around 60 to 70 million a year, if not more. So they're doing just fine. That's why they're not going to join the conference anytime soon unless they absolutely have to. And again, if they need a home for their Olympic sports because the ACC happens to collapse. Outside of that, I don't see them doing anything. I really don't. Son of Skeeter, let me see. Bob Swinger says, I agree, Daniel. He says he don't think Pitt makes the cut. I definitely don't think Pitt would be the top of the list. I think NC State, Louisville would be at the top of the list. Then I think probably, obviously Virginia Tech would be up there too if they don't get into the Power 2. Man, I don't know. But yeah, I definitely think Louisville and NC State are probably number 1 and 2 on the list for sure. See. All right. Listen, I'm doing this. I am obviously working today, so I've got to get back to work. But I do appreciate everyone hopping in the chat. Carla Jenkins, I think I forgot to mention her in the chat room. Thank her. John Kristofik is in the house. Sorry, Outlaw. I'm just now seeing that post, brother. I should have hollered at you earlier, and I just didn't. I put this thing together so quick, man. Sometimes these lives, I throw them together so quick, I don't even have a chance to invite anybody. Make sure I don't want to leave anybody out. I think I mentioned Call Me David earlier. Brad Boo, I mentioned earlier. Daniel Gigax says Notre Dame isn't leaving being a football independent as long as they have a special deal with the college football playoff on their own TV deal. Yep, and a home for their Olympic sports. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to call it a show. I appreciate everybody hopping on. Sorry I wasn't able to get to as many comments as I wanted. I do appreciate everybody chiming in. Appreciate all the support. I've got to get back to my day job. Appreciate everybody tuning in. If you're watching this on the replay, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. Couz's Corner, I cover West Virginia, the Big 12, and conference realignment. As you can tell, I cover West Virginia a ton. I love my Mountaineers. Hope to have some content on them coming up later today as well. I'll try not to work too hard, Daniel. I'll try my best not to. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the kind words. I hope I know West Virginia football. I try hard to. I don't consider myself an expert by any means, but I feel like I'm, know as much as most. I probably know as much as the other guy. You know what I mean? For lack of a better term. But anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I appreciate your support. I appreciate your time, your effort, and for making me part of your day. Hope the rest of your day is top shelf. God bless, and cue Country Roads.